usually think when they get into the cannabis industry is they think, I'll just open a dispensary. That seems to be the best thing to do. And it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's really super hard. And what I thought would be interesting too is not only to have a dispensary owner, I've got Curio Wellness here from Maryland, but I've also got Precious from a delivery company in New Jersey. So if you guys could take a moment and just introduce yourself and tell the audience who you are.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Precious Osagie-Erese, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Roll of Life Inc. We are a tech and logistics-based delivery company based out of East Orange, New Jersey. Right now, we currently deliver CBD within our county, Essex County, and we are on our way in New Jersey to apply for a Class 6 delivery license to further our delivery efforts into the medical and recreational realm. We really chose delivery as a lane for us, really because of the technology and the logistics space meeting as one. And then we always realized that our retail partners, our dispensary partners, sometimes they don't want to do that delivery lift themselves. So it made sense to be able to have that for them in a new market that never had it before. So I'm happy to talk about how delivery and retail meet in the middle.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Wendy Bronfein. I'm the co-founder and chief brand officer of Curio Wellness. We're the market leader in cultivation and manufacturing in Maryland. We also have a dispensary, But last August we announced that we were going to be rebranding our dispensary as Far and Daughter, which is Swedish for father and daughter. I know I'm not Swedish. But we are a family-owned and operated company, and with my father and my sister and my brother too, but we didn't make the name. But we also had created a $30 million investment fund so that we could provide the startup capital to women, BIPOC, and disabled veterans to open one of these franchise dispensaries.
Hi everybody, my name is Penelope Steven. I am the Chief Commercial Officer at Community Growth Partners, who some of you might know as Rebel. Prior to last week, we were the closest dispensary to New York City. Now New Jersey is a whole lot closer. We are women-led and minority-led, and we are very soon to be vertically integrated and are launching a sublingual mist next month, at the end of May, that some of you might have tried last week. It's called Halo. It's fantastic. It's a microdose sublingual. I'm really happy to be here to talk about what it really means to run a dispensary.
So Rebel really one of the nicest dispensaries I've ever been to up in Great Barrington. It's in a renovated old farmhouse. And while she did note that New Jersey has come online, when you first start these dispensaries in states that go from medical to adult use, product selection is always a big challenge. And I know that when you go to a new dispensary in a new adult use state, they have a few products, but that's usually what they have, is a few products to just get off the ground. When you go into Rebel, you see just an array of products, and Her Highness, who is here today, her products are there. It's just a beautiful store, but a lot of options. That's a big jump to get from opening the door to then having a robust selection of products. So can we talk about what that journey is to go from just being excited to get the door open to then actually running? I mean, you've got staffing, you've got rules and regs, traffic.
Yes, so it is definitely a journey. I mean, when we started up the company, there were pretty much 5 of us who were running everything and getting our hands dirty and all kinds of things. And now our team has grown significantly, and we do have an HR department, logistics folks, etc. But you bring up a really good point about assortment. So that's something that comes on really quick. We started about 18, 19 months ago or so in Massachusetts, and looking at what the assortment that was available then versus now is night and day. So many national brands have come online in Massachusetts and keep on shouting out Her Highness. We're so happy to launch them in Massachusetts too. But it really is different. I mean, even when you look at menus in New Jersey now, you can see that they are a new adult use market. I think all you can buy now pretty much are vapes and flour. So I haven't even seen the lozenges on any adult use menus. So, and it's coming, but it does take a lot of work to do that. It's not, you know, anytime you're running any kind of commerce business or any kind of retail, it's not that you just figure, hey, I'm just gonna buy 20 of these and 50 of these. There's really an art and a science to it, figuring out, first of all, who we're talking to. We speak to a very heavily female audience, and that was by design. When you come into our shop, we're set up a lot differently than most folks that you see in Massachusetts. When you come in, we have packaging on the shelf. So everything has to be pretty much a showroom model because we're not allowed to keep live product on the floor. But when you come in, you kind of don't know that. It's the same as if you went into a cosmetic store or candles or something, you pick up the packaging. It's not open, but you can look and feel and touch and see what's going to end up in your bag. So that was something that was important to us to put together a really familiar retail environment, so it didn't feel like you were shopping at a CVS and you know, buying off a stagnant menu. So you can really see and showcase some of the great things that brands have to say because I don't think they get a whole lot of play in a lot of places. But in any case, when putting together those assortments, there's really a thought behind it, looking at not just what you think people will like, but really like reacting to what those numbers are, taking your best guess at what it needs to be balanced, how much flour people buy in the market. And as we all know, that in newer markets, it's usually the majority of it until people become more familiar with products, and it's ever changing.
I'm probably going to jump around a little, so forgive me because I'm just kind of stepping in. You know, both of you guys are founders or co-founders. That it's a really long journey to go from the idea of, hey, I want to do this, to actually getting it done. I know, like Charlotte was, you know, hitting the ground running for at least a couple of years before Rebel ever opened the door. Wendy, what was your, you know, path from I got this idea and then to execution?
So up until 2016, I lived here. In my past life, I worked in the television industry. I was a producer and editor and worked on the marketing side of TV. My last role was as creative director for Live when it was Kelly and Michael. But I'm originally from Maryland, where I live now, and they had announced that they were going to create a medical cannabis program. And so I saw the news blurb and I shot it off to my dad, like, this looks interesting. And from there, it honestly was just a very organic transition. His background was in healthcare, pharmaceutical drug distribution in either the retail form or long-term care facilities. So he was very familiar with healthcare and regulated industry. I came from a marketing and branding background. I had recently completed my MBA. I was interested in building a brand myself. And so it was kind of the partnership of those two pieces. And from the cannabis side, it was just kind of, okay, first we looked at what does the Maryland law look like? Like, was this an actionable law that you could create business off of? Kind of check that box. Then we started to talk to people, physicians and scientists and things like that to kind of, you know, as he would say, like, is this snake oil or is this real, right? And we're validated that there was a therapeutic effect here that had been stigmatized by the government. And then kind of went into the mode of, let's look at programs in the US. At that point, Colorado had just become legal, because this was like 2014. And we were looking outside the country where there were other legal markets and sort of learning what was going on. And really just kind of every little piece of information checked the box, and nothing, there was never like a point of like, all right, are we gonna do it or are we not gonna do it? It just kind of like every piece of information we got was enough due diligence to continue to move forward until we were writing a business plan and the state was gonna release an application and we were gonna apply, and then it kind of naturally all occurred from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, similar to you, Wendy, I was in the journalism track as well. I was a news producer for CNN at News 12, New Jersey, when I went back. My co-founder, who's also my best friend, Tanya Bryant, he's always been fascinated by the industry, really on the legacy side. In East Orange, New Jersey, I call it our little urban suburban hood. We've seen it all. There's not a lot we haven't seen when it came to cannabis. But I was just always told in a traditional African household that if you use cannabis, you're gonna lose your mind and stay away from it. My parents were like really sticklers about it. So while we were best friends and I knew that he was doing that, I used to tell him, don't get in trouble, don't get in trouble. But around 2016, 2017, I went to get my master's in journalism, and he came back and he said, there's this huge industry happening on the West Coast, we need to kind of really take a look at it. And I'm like, you know, I'm gonna get in trouble, so no. A year later, he actually comes back. He was at Boise State at the time. He had this business plan, he had a deck. It was kind of all messed up, and at the time, I actually just felt bad. So I said I would help him just kind of rebrand this idea he had about an app that would deliver cannabis to people in our area, right? And simultaneously while I'm at school, I take this deep dive really into the industry. I think like a year I spent really just learning and going to these events and meeting people. And I was blown away. Like I was just really blown away that this industry was happening and kind of felt like under my nose or under the noses of minority communities. I said, I swear to you, no one knows that the cannabis industry is as far advanced as it is right now. And I used to walk around and ask people in my area, like, do you know this company? Do you ever? No. So when I started to get that grip, the first thing I did was make a PowerPoint presentation to tell my parents that I was leaving journalism to join the cannabis industry. And I had to lead with the numbers and the revenue and everything. So once I got them on board, we really started to come together and realize that, and then COVID happened, that delivery was going to be very important when it came to the industry. Technology was going to be very important. And we wanted to mix those things and essentially create an e-commerce platform where people, discreet or not, store or not, whoever you are, women, men, you have an opportunity to have cannabis delivered right to your front door in a manner that was safe. And we started to work hard on the advocacy side because I always believe you can't be in the industry if you're not also an advocate. And it kind of simultaneously merged our business. We started to grow not because we had high CBD sales all the time. It's still just a journey to teach people about what CBD is in a brand new market where people only are familiar with THC and cannabis on the legacy side. Our growth really came from educating the community, having events and telling people this industry's happened, join, figure it out. So now they're relying on us as the truth tellers of what's going on and ready to support our business at the same time. So that's just how we really found our way into the cannabis industry as founders.
I think it's worth noting that there are a lot of opportunities in the market for some of the female-led licensing. So a lot of the programs try to offer women licenses as social equity offering. And while it sounds really awesome, it's not actually it doesn't actually work as, I think, well as they hoped. And I think Wendy, we recently wrote a story about a situation that Curio Wellness went through where they were applying for licenses and going up against some applications that were had female props, let's say. So the application was saying, well, there's this woman that's in charge of this company, but it turned out she really wasn't. And I'd like for you to kind of tell the audience a little bit of what you guys went through and what you're doing about it. Because I think it's an important story to hear because it just kind of shows that even though there are attempts being made, you still end up sometimes facing hurdles. And I think Wendy's a good example of that and how she's addressed it.
So I'm not sure how much I can say because there's obviously some pending litigation. But yes, the situation is such that there were winners in the state where we applied where it became clear to us based on some investigative work that we did before we entered into the litigation that women were put up as kind of fronts for having leadership roles in the company. And the reason that it was materially important was because in this state, their laws around WMBE say that that person has to have operational control. So it's not like we could say, okay, I'm gonna put the largest number of shares in your name and now you're the leader and we'll put you up and now we'll win because we said there was a woman. They had to actually be the ones running the business, and it was clear from the narratives of these applicants who are often operating in other places where these women have nothing to do with it, that they wouldn't be really the leadership. And so it was kind of the game that is now played in some ways to like steal the equity opportunities that are being created. So I think that is definitely part of the problem. The only other thing I'm going to jump in here and say about it's totally related, but I think if you want to get a dispensary, you should know, is you should understand 280E. Okay, let's just do it. Who knows 280E? Good job. Okay. So I mean, that's one of the biggest hurdles, and a dispensary is primarily an all plant touching business. So you really remove a lot of ability to deduct ordinary income from your taxes. So you pay a very high tax rate. So it's very important to get into the dispensary knowing kind of the business parameters. The other part of my job, I do a lot of public policy work, and so on the federal side, I've spent the last year or so heavily lobbying relative to the movement of SAFE, as well as pushing for the opening of capital markets, the Small Business Administration looking at cannabis, and dealing with 280. Because as wonderful it is that states create programs that create opportunities, if we don't deal with the fact that people can't get a bank, can't get money, and pay taxes up the wazoo, it's not really going to work in the end. So fingers crossed that, you know, in the next, let's call it 18 months, God willing, we deal with these problems, we get 280 off our plate, and safe banking resolved within this calendar year.
It's interesting because in New York State, they're proposing that there will be a 280E-ish situation for New York State, so that even though you can't claim it federally, you could claim those deductions within the state. So that was kind of an interesting point that they're trying to do. Did rebel from anything along the lines of whether there were female licenses?
Not really at first. So we tried. Massachusetts is a little bit different than New York. I mean, New York, I think, is doing a great job already making sure that female and minority licenses will be available. But we did kind of go down that path, but it didn't necessarily benefit us so much at first.
There are so many things that you have to keep track of with running a dispensary, and technology seems to be a big issue, whether, you know, your back of house software, delivery software, things of that nature. Is that a big cost? Was that a challenge to figure out who you would hire for which one you go with? Because that's a kind of a sticky decision. Once you make that decision, you're it's hard to switch out of that decision.
Yes, really good point. So software, it can be really costly. It can be costly on the onset of implementation. It can be even more costly if you don't pick the right provider. We vetted a whole lot of people, and even 2 years ago when we were looking at it, there weren't as many players on the market. But the thing to understand about your POS software, your inventory, your wholesale software, it all has to talk to the state seat-to-sale tracking. So for us in Massachusetts, everything that we do, it has to work with metrics. So there has to be an interface there. And if you don't interface and you don't even know that there's something off, that something went wonky in the back end, you can face pretty hefty fines. So that's something really important to really thoroughly vet whoever you're going with. And not just that, have somebody on your team what they're doing. I mean, there's times that we've seen some stuff, or we've caught it even before the software providers caught it, but wouldn't have been able to do that without having somebody really knowledgeable.
I would agree with all of that. I do think that having that IT person early is important. I've also found that because these companies are specialized to us and pretty small, they'll actually work with you, and because every state is different and the nuance is going to be different, they're interested in kind of enhancing their software to improve it for what you need. We've had that experience with people that we've worked with. The one thing I would tell you, and the thing that just makes me so sad, is like, we don't have a POS system like if you were in like a Gap or a Target or whatever. So anytime you want to kind of be able to pull the data that lets you know, like, anonymize, like, who's buying this, they're what gender and what age bracket from what zip code, like, you have to work harder to pull your data and then manipulate those reports to get that kind of stuff. You're really gonna get things that are more basic, because we kind of deal with a lot of systems where it's like, well, it was made for us, because right now nobody else they might not work with us. But obviously, back to that federal stuff, if they change it, we'd have a lot more at our disposal.
As a company that's developing its tech from the ground up, we have like a different operating cost, a whole different set of rules when it comes to it. When we first decided to go with our own app, because there's a lot of other delivery softwares that you guys can use, Dispensary uses, they just sort of like connect, and you'll get the order through that platform and the Dispensary fulfills it on the back end. We really wanted to maintain brand ownership, so I wanted someone to feel like, even though they were ordering, just like Uber Eats or anything, even though they were ordering from a dispensary, they went through the full roll-of-life experience to get that order to their front door, right? And then still making sure that dispensary owners, retail partners are feeling empowered to use our brands, even if they deliver themselves, because now they have another reach that they can do. But in terms of putting together the tech, I had another good friend who I called an evil genius, because one day he made me like a replicate NG Transit app, and I was just skirting fees my whole life. And then I asked him, I'm like, well, can you make me a replicate Uber app? And he's like, yeah, I actually did one before, but I just never used it. And that's when a whole bunch of worms uncovered, and we're like, oh my God, we found our software tech person. And I started to learn so much. We're in our beta phase, which will probably be released by the end of July. And it's so much that goes into building that front end of the app. On the back end, we connect with a lot of familiar partners, such as like OnFleet or POS system that helps us connect to dispensaries. But it's an interesting process when you're building that tech, because there's a lot you cannot do in cannabis, including like cashless options for people, being that we don't have traditional banking. So how can someone safely process debit cards on our app to be able to make their purchases and everything work out? So those are things we're thinking about, and it does get pretty costly when you're building something from the ground up. You end up using vendors from overseas to quicken your processes. You end up shelling tens of thousands of dollars all towards the tech, because in a sense, you're a leading tech company. I say all delivery companies are tech companies, because in the first, you have to go through some sort of tech process to get it there. So if you're gonna do it that way, definitely look at how you're going to set up your expenses to put as much to your developers so that they can get you a solid product. Because then they still have to try to pick at that product. You don't want a situation where someone's using your app, it doesn't work. That's the quickest way to lose a consumer, because they're not gonna come back and they're gonna tell their people, the app doesn't really work, it's not convenient, I don't need it. So I say show no expense if you're going through the tech route.
So it leads us to another piece of this puzzle, and really running a dispensary or a delivery option to get the products delivered to the consumer. There's so many decisions that have to be made. Tech is one of the decisions. Payment processing, the thing that is so boring and so awful, but is so critical to running a dispensary, is how are they going to pay? And we know Visa and MasterCard are not allowed. A lot of dispensaries have ATM machines within the dispensary, but then some of them have kind of different workarounds and different apps that they use. How did you guys cross that bridge of making your payment decision?
Again, vetting your payment processors is very important. There's some things that we've all read about in the news with some folks getting into some trouble with some of that, but really the most viable option is creating a reverse ATM, which is what we're all kind of forced to do. And what that does is that even though you can't use a proper credit card, you can use a debit card, and what happens is when you swipe it, it shows up as an ATM transaction, because essentially that's what it is. But again, it gets hairy, like everything with cannabis. It requires giving people extra change and rounding up and charging a fee and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, we do the same. We basically offer three methods. Cash, there's a system called Can Pay that people can use, which again is connected to the debit card. And then we have the cashless ATM, where our location is actually right next to a bank. So originally we didn't do an ATM in-house because we were like, well, the ATM is literally right there. But in, I want to say like 6 months or so ago, we put up like a wrapped branded ATM inside for ease.
For us, we also have three methods, of course, cash. We're adapted an API for a payment processor that does the cashless ATM situation as well, where, you know, we kind of did a little trick, and I think this would be helpful for people where, because if the order ends up being like $46, they most likely have to pay $50, right? So then we usually tell people that change, instead of giving it back to you, it can be like a tip for your driver, it can be a tip for the bud tender, you know, just ways to make people understand what this new process is, because it's still consumer education that has to go into them figuring out why they're paying more money than they actually would, even though they're going to get that change back. And then on the tech side, for people who are more in that space, looking into tokens. Now that Apple, Google hasn't yet, I don't believe, but Apple's allowed cannabis apps to be on their app store. There's ways to kind of get a little creative and maybe create your own token where people are paying for tokens with the normal form of payment, and then you're accepting those tokens as a way of payment for your order. And there's ways to do customer loyalty with that. They can earn tokens. So you definitely have to get creative with the cash part, because again, we don't have safe banking yet. But when that happens, hopefully this year, if it gets through the vote, through the Compete Act, we can live like normal businesses.
Let's talk about look and feel and store design, because that's another thing that you have to make decisions about. I have to say, one of the things I loved about Rebel is, okay, so it's like a 2-hour drive from my house. I had to go to the bathroom. There are dispensaries in Great Barrington that you walk in and they go, yeah, you'll have to go to the gas station next door. Are you kidding me? Really? And one of them even said, well, it's Massachusetts law. No, we can't let you use the bathroom. I thought, no, that's not. And I think that, you know, again, to me, that's a level of important decision making, is do you have a bathroom available? But then also just how you actually get it done. I think Charlotte was very hands-on with the design of the Rebel dispensary. And I'm curious to hear you too, Wendy, like, what was the process for deciding the look and feel? Because the dispensaries now, when you get into a market where there's a lot of licenses, the look and feel of when you walk into that dispensary is usually going to determine whether you're a repeat customer. If you walk in and you're like, I feel welcome here, there's a bathroom I can use, there's products I like, but I feel comfortable, versus some of them you walk in and, I mean, I went to one the other day and there was, like the kiosks were these big kind of like giant iPad things, but there was all this light coming in from behind them, so I was having to kind of do this and I couldn't quite see the pad, and it's a little frustrating. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys, because I'm curious. I just love the look and feel so much. I'm curious how you got there.
So my transition that I didn't talk about earlier, I come from the luxury fashion merchandising world. So running those types of businesses from end to end, it's pretty much the same job that I have now, except before I didn't have to worry about 280E or regulations or getting in trouble or any of that stuff. So, but in any case, it was really important for us. And Charlotte, our founder, is also an interior designer. So we were really intentional about creating a space where people could have a familiar shopping experience. So it's a little strange. I mean, I remember when I first got into the business years ago and went out to Colorado, and it was such a jarring experience. I didn't know what to expect from adult use. And I went to Colorado, California, and Nevada all in like 4 days, and I was just like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? You walk in and you have a vestibule and you think you're in a dentist's office, and then you get through the other side and there's music blaring, and like, it was just so weird. So that was something that we really wanted to make sure that it was not a disjointed experience. You walk in, you could be shopping for anything. A lot of times people come into our shop and say, oh, it looks like you guys are a cosmetic store or a spa or something. So that was the first approach, was figuring out how do we want customers to feel when they walk in the door here. And then also too, the product selection and the display go hand in hand, and we thought about, okay, we're gonna have these beautiful products and we're gonna unleash them and put them out on the shelves. What does that need to look like, and how is it shoppable? So, I mean, the approach is very much the same. We treat the products, whether it's luxury accessories or ready to wear or whatever it is, every product deserves that attention. I don't think anybody's ever gonna fault somebody for something being too nicely displayed or respectfully displaying cannabis. So we just approached it as it was any other business.
So we're like through spirits, because very, very similar. Well, it's interesting, we're actually right now going through the remodel of our store relative to the rebrand. So, but I guess one piece I should share is that we're in a medical market, and our thesis when we opened a dispensary was we were going to open a wellness center, because when we considered the patient, we felt that that person was choosing cannabis because Western options were not working. And so they would be open to alternative solutions. So when you enter our store, you enter what we call the holistic pharmacy, which is traditional retail that doesn't deal with 280E, where we sell hemp-based CBD and a curated collection of health and beauty products, vitamins, and supplements. So everything that could be complementary to something that the patients might be experiencing, or is just a nice to have relative to the community at large. We also have a wellness area where we have acupuncturists, massage therapists, and estheticians who have complementary services to what kind of the whole experience is. And then the dispensary is sort of like that. I usually refer to the building as a donut, like the public spaces are the donut and the dispensary is the munchkin in the middle. But so in this rebrand, it keeps all of those elements that we offer, but we've really kind of shifted the palette. It probably does feel a little bit more feminine. It probably had more of a clean, modern look before. But again, we have a visual merchandiser on staff who comes from a more traditional retail background. And so it is about like, how do you feature these products, particularly because we have the same issue where it's like, in the dispensary you've got dummy packaging out, there can't be anything live, so how do you kind of let someone connect to the product when they're really just kind of reading a box? But in that traditional retail we have up front, we have much more fluidity in terms of it being like a regular store.
And we know we have an architect in the room, so if you're thinking about doing a dispensary, there's an architect back there that you can consult with. And being someone that's married to an architect, I would always say make that your first step. Because when you find a location, dispensaries are location challenged. A lot of what they say is, finding that location is critical, because that also often determines your application. A lot of applications require you to have the space already figured out before you can do anything else. That's actually a great segue to, you guys have this farmhouse that you renovated, correct? And Wendy, how did you guys determine your location? Because that's what I'm always hearing, is that that's one of the hardest things when you decide you're going to do a dispensary, is finding a space.
So again, we went back to regular shopping patterns for people and thought, okay, so where are people going? We're located across from a great supermarket called Guido's, where everybody in the Berkshires kind of goes there and gets their amazing food. We're also located across from another more streamlined supermarket. And we wanted to be in the hub of where everything was at. We didn't want to be tucked away somewhere kind of off the beaten path, because just like anything, think of when you're running your errands on Saturday morning, you kind of want to be efficient and go where everything's at. But back to the challenges of location, you also have to make sure you're picking a friendly community. Although there's state regulations, there's also regulations within municipalities which vary so much. Just once you cross over that street that puts you in this town to the next town, it determines sometimes what the fees you're going to pay. In Massachusetts, we pay a host community fee of 3%. And many municipalities still have them. There's only a couple who have taken those away, but that 3%, that can mean a lot, because we're not a traditional business, we are subject to 280E, so that can really eat into your profits. You also have to look at just, regardless of what it says on paper, how is the community gonna accept you or not accept you?
So in Maryland, our location was somewhat prescribed because the program was created where dispensaries were 2 per senatorial district. And the senatorial district where our cultivation application was placed defined at that time where our dispensary would be. So we were just looking at that area. Also at that time when our state did it, it was not an application where you had to show site control and things like that. So we had the ability to win the license and then look for something. But very similarly, we are on a major thoroughfare that I would consider, taking this loosely because it's suburbia, but like kind of like the 5th Avenue of, you know, it's got your Target on it and all that kind of stuff. But it was a big storefront. It had all glass windows, which we really liked, because we were thinking, like, how do you get grandma and soccer mom, so to speak, to feel comfortable with this choice? And so we didn't want to be, you know, in a seedy shopping center where it was like, well, they're the only people who will take us. And so the fact that we had, you know, this natural light that comes through, we felt like that played into the transparency. It also, to the earlier point, was from a real estate perspective, high traffic, you know, the traffic numbers going on that street, you know, the median income in and around the area. So there's kind of the traditional mindset that played into it, and then there was the things we wanted to do relative to our industry to say, like, hey, we're here and don't be afraid to make this choice.
For me, location's a little different.
That was what I was gonna ask you, was did you have a boundary? Did you kind of draw a map to start with?
Right, so location and site control is one of the main reasons I've always even encouraged people who are looking to get into the industry that see all of these barriers to think of delivery, because we don't have this huge uplift battle when it comes to a perfect location that meets all of the municipal and state requirements. But because delivery can honestly be done all virtually if you really think about it. But we acquired space recently, actually one of our first major big purchases. That's an office space that'll be for our drivers, our employees, our staff. So we still have to kind of do it up, because I want people to feel good when they come to work and, you know, come to be around us and things of that nature. But location speaks to delivery on a more bigger path when we think of routing, when we think of how we're actually going to safely move from city to city, New Jersey. Luckily, the delivery aspects are not enclosed like the way it is in Massachusetts, where we can deliver to pretty much anybody. It was one of the main things we used to tell municipalities. Your opting out really doesn't affect much because a delivery service can still deliver products to your residents, and now you're not seeing any of that tax revenue. So we partnered with our back-end OnFleet that does a really good job in sort of doing a routing system for us. And one of our main dispatchers, our lead dispatcher, actually has a lot of experience from Amazon and FedEx. So we kind of pulled on those people to kind of like really help us figure out, well, what would be the safe way for us to maneuver through streets and back ends in the nighttime and drivers. Just quickly how it works in New Jersey is strictly courier. We can only pick up and drop off, so we don't have a lot of inventory control problems too, which is also a big alleviator. But what that means is I'm not gonna have a driver just bing, 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 bing every time someone goes on the app. We're kind of pushing people another consumer mannerism I'm trying to teach is that next day delivery is okay too. You're not gonna die if you don't get it that cycle. You'll be fine if you have to, you know, place it on a different day, because at that point our driver goes to the retailer partner, can collect a massive amount of orders at one time, and now it's just fulfilling those routes. And anything that's not delivered goes back to the dispensary partner. And then we're in between two models of fleet management, but then they bring those vehicles back to our office space with the parking and sign in and sign out, and that's pretty much how we move it around. And it is a lesser cost when I think about it when we evaluated dispensary or delivery, because that location barrier is one of the toughest barriers, especially for people of color looking to get in the industry, because it is really freaking hard to have a site prepared before you even apply. And then you can be holding on to that site for Lord knows how long, and then still lose. So we just looked at it in that different sense.
I could ask a million more questions. I'd love to talk about staffing. I'd love to talk about how you choose the products on your shelves, but we're getting to that moment where I think the audience here, I'm sure, has some questions for these guys. Well, there they go. Right up here in the front.
Yeah, I'm really interested in safety in delivery. Have you had any issues with being robbed?
The question is about safety in delivery.
That's a great question. On the CBD side, we haven't had any issues. If you look at the data around delivery, it actually hasn't seen any sort of high robberies, high, money heist, people tracking down cars and everything like that. I think there's really been one negative incident that happened in Colorado that really let a lot of people upgrade their security barriers. But as the operator, you're the one that really go above and beyond. So again, no unmarked cars. You don't really need to have a uniform for your driver that lets them know that they're in a delivery vehicle. You want to outfit your vehicles. Some of the requirements in certain regulations make sure that you have safety lock boxes, panic boxes. On our app, there is a alarm button for a panic. If you get to an accident, there's protocols that you're supposed to do. So you just go above and beyond. You think of every single thing someone would try to do to track your delivery driver. Again, we don't hold inventory in our main location. And you try to up and compete that. Because even regulations don't really meet a lot of these things we're doing it. We're doing it because we just know it'll be what creates a safety environment for our drivers and for the consumers at the end.
Okay.
Hi, I'm curious about employee retention. We know that there's high turnover in dispensaries, and I'm curious what steps you're taking to address.
That's a great question. It's about employee retention because of the turnover at dispensaries.
So I do think that it is a industry that draws people who are very attracted to the product, and that thus can create some of that issue. We do use some tools that have helped us identify kind of the ideal candidate in terms of their skill set and what we need to do that job, right? Which would speak to are they very extroverted and ready to talk to people? Do they have some level of detail orientation because you have to do the job, but you also have to be super compliant at the same time? Do they have the stamina to kind of engage with people over and over and over all day? And that has helped us kind of find people who really can succeed well. But I think, I also think pulling from people who want to make the moves, on the floor speaking, pulling from people who want to make the moves who've just worked in traditional retail, I manage the Gap, I'd love to manage Dispensary, is I think a great move. We tend to hire a lot of people across the board who just are masters of their domain in the regular world and then just bring it to our space.
At Rebel, we also, we see that you're so right about that. The average employee turnover rate in dispensary sales is about 40%, which is crazy. When I first got into the business, I didn't believe that statistic. I was like, there's no way, but it is true. So we invest in our people. We have, in addition to having standard healthcare benefits, we also have an employee stock option program, and that doesn't just extend to senior executives. Every single person in the company is a participant. So, after 90 days of employment, even part-time sales associates start earning equity. So that was another mission that we had, is that we wanted to be able to create generational wealth within folks who might not have opportunities. I think so many times, forget all kinds of other demographics, but hourly retail workers are often overlooked with being able to not only make a living, but create a decent life for themselves and their families. So that's something that we believed in strongly. We also look at the burnout rate. It's hard when you're in a busy dispensary and just on. So we do things like on Friday, Saturday, Sundays, we order lunch for everybody because it's not always easy to take that break. And then we just make sure that we're treating people the way that we would want to be treated.
Hi ladies, my name is Vivian. I own a CBD business in Fargo, North Dakota. My question is, obviously we are not legalized for the recreational yet. I know it will be too late to start once it's passed. So my question for you is, as a transition from a CBD business to dispensary, because we do have a store and it's doing really well, what are the top 3 priority things that I should start preparing right now, other than the legal part?
So her question is, she's got a CBD legal business right now, but she wants to kind of get her ducks in a row and prepare for a transition to adult use.
The top 3 priorities. I know there's tons of things we have to prepare, so even
number one, regulations. I mean, you're not gonna know what the regulations are until they exist, but maybe looking at other states and seeing what they are. There are certain universal commonalities within them. I'd say get familiar with some of the seed to sale tracking software, like look at Metric, look at BioTrax, look at those things, because they're different but not that different, and get prepared for that. But also start preparing the accounting piece of it too, and just start vetting some folks who really understand what cannabis accounting looks like.
Yeah, the only other, I think that's all right. If the store is doing well right now, I also think you could consider kind of just your customer base that you already have and knowing kind of who they are, what they're buying, because ultimately, whatever the mix is that ends up in your dispensary is probably gonna be some version that's in any other state, and prepare for like, how are you going to pivot someone from A to B and who's right for what products, because that's kind of like their ascension in the product mix from going from a CBD to anything that would have other cannabinoids and terpenes in it.
So that 40% turnover rate is pretty expensive. And so I just wanted to know, like, for Rebelle, and by the way, I think that was like the first dispensary where I felt like seen as a woman. So I really appreciate your setup. But that 40% turnover is pretty expensive. So like, what are you doing? Like, what action plans are you putting in place to lower that turnover? And then for Precious, you talked about spending time on your employee space in your office and how important that was. Can you go back to that, why it's important in terms of your engagement? And are you looking at your turnover already? Have you had some turnover, and what does that percentage look like?
So just to address the Rebelle question, so one thing, it is hard to reduce turnover rate, but what we did is we, again, invested back into people. We hired a really strong, motivational, inspirational manager who he's been able to provide some great leadership, and that's helped a lot too. Other things that we do is we really do try to promote from within. So anytime we post a job, there's two pipelines of talent we use. One is we work with a group called ROCA. And just for anybody who doesn't know what ROCA is is an organization that helps folks, usually younger folks, who are kind of either in and out of the judicial system, are about to step into it, and who are at risk to go a way that they wouldn't want to go when they look back in 20 years from now. So that's our first pipeline of talent. We try to hire those folks first, but then also anytime there's any kind of new position or something becomes vacant, we draw from our own people, and so we try to promote from within so people can see that there's value in sticking around.
And actually an interesting thing for me, so right now we're a team of 6. And we're preparing to hire drivers as we're moving forward towards getting our Class 6 delivery license when that time opens up. The state hasn't released the full application for that. But every single person that's worked for us, we started paying them. Even my friend who was the mad scientist, like, I believe in incentivizing people to get the best work. And every single one of them told me, stop paying me, I will work for equity. I will work to be a part of this mission. I will work to be a part of what y'all are doing. And I used to tell Ty, I'm like, you think they're really gonna keep working? And I think it really spoke to just your company's mission and vision and the passion behind the leadership, when people say, I'd rather start doing this with you, alongside of you, than rather as a contractor and employee. And I want to sort of like use that same mechanism as, we've teamed up with the great HR partners. We're preparing what our drivers, would look like, how they would merge into our experience. And I want them to have that same feeling, almost like, shit, I work here for free, you pay me, and we even take just equity, whatever. And, I think it's creating that atmosphere. That's why when we didn't really need to have an office, but we wanted a place where all of us can commute. Our dispatcher lives in Florida, and is like ready to pick up and move. Our accountant also lives in Florida, and is ready to pick up and move and be around us so that we can all grow together. So you just want to really build that atmosphere where people want to work, they want to have a good time. Because again, outside of corporate cannabis, this is the first time like cannabis in the suit. I like the dress, but it's really a culture. We don't really sit around with my friends when we consume this. We're not sitting here in boardrooms and big shirts and everything. Like, it wouldn't even make sense for me to bring somebody everybody into a cannabis culture and it's not even reflective of what we know it to be. So I encourage everybody, when you think of that, like still incorporate what that culture means to you, and people will stick beside you.
I think ultimately employees just want to feel seen and heard, so I'm sure if somebody went up to Wendy and said, wow, I really think we should get manicures for free every week, and she may be like, you know, that is such a great idea, but I'll look into it. And she's probably thinking, no, we can't afford that, and we're not gonna do that, but just the fact that she's probably telling this person, I hear you, I'm listening to you, and I'm gonna take that under consideration. Most people feel like, okay, cool, she heard me, and you're good with that. We're gonna make this our last question.
Hi, my name is Nathaniel from FinCan. Our company specializes in compliant cannabis banking, payments, lending, and other financial services. And you guys are talking a lot about banking and payments, so I thought it might be helpful just to add to your conversation a little bit. I mean, right now, we have at least a dozen federally insured banks that support the cannabis business in New Jersey. We don't support cashless ATMs because they're illegal and getting a lot more risky. But there is completely legal MasterCard, Visa, Discover, debit merchant processing available for in-person dispensaries and delivery services that's available. So there's really not any compelling reason to be cash heavy at this point. So
there you go. FinCan is in the house. I know, I put that, we're gonna wrap up this panel. We've got lunch in the back, so